Hey, we are extraordinarily fortunate to have brought this pair of historians that you see up here with me today. You've already met Dr. Howe. Now I'd like to introduce to you his counterpart from Mexico, Romeo Ricardo Flores Caballero, who is at this time the director of the State Archives of the state of Nuevo León in Mexico, in Monterrey. He's also on the publication board of a press that I want to bring to your attention if you're not aware of it, and that's the Fondo Editorial de Nuevo León. And I hope I don't insult anybody by saying it's the best press I've ever worked with. Dr. Flores was part of the kind welcoming committee for me when we brought out a translation of Sleuthing the Alamo in Mexico about a year and a half ago. It ain't easy to get a book published on the Alamo, and in Mexico. And I congratulate the press for their bravery. We did make a few little changes in it. We were going to call it Investigando el Alamo, and we decided to call it Confrontando el Alamo. And changed a few things. It's a different picture of Davy on the cover. But in addition to his very kind welcome that he and Carolina Farias and the other people at the Fondo Editorial de Nuevo León gave to me in Monterrey, he is an extraordinarily distinguished historian who has also spent a good deal of time in Texas, both in earning his master's degree at Sam Houston State University and his PhD in Latin American history under the eminent Nettie Lee Benson at the University of Texas at Austin, where the Latin American Library is now known as the Benson Latin American Library. In addition to his many historical works, including the newly republished Revolución y Contrarrevolución de la Independencia de Mexico, a study of the conflicting forces in Mexico from the year 1867 to 1967. I realize that there's a misprint in your program and it lists those years in the wrong order. We decided that he would not actually give us talk on time travel today. But all of us who noticed that error noticed it a little bit too late. But seriously, the Mexican Revolution, if he'll let me say this, and I pardon if I offend anyone, the Mexican Revolution, which succeeded in 1820-21, was a kind of shotgun marriage between liberal Republicans and disappointed royalists, and the forces that they represented swung back and forth in Mexico for many years after the revolution, as well as they had before. Dr. Flores has held professorial chairs in the United States, in California, and Nebraska. He has taught in the city of Mexico at both the Colegio de Mexico and the Universidad Autónoma de Mexico, Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico. I knew I'd left out a word there somewhere. I'm someday going to learn what they mean. My Spanish is almost that bad. He has been a member of the Mexican Congress, an eminent diplomat. He arranged for the opening of the Mexican consulate in Raleigh, which I'm very grateful to see, and he served as consul general in Los Angeles, which is no small post for a Mexican consul. When I met him, he was serving as president of CONARTE, the Council for Culture and the Arts in the state of Nuevo León. He's a man of great accomplishments of many parts, and he's going to be talking to you about the ramifications of Texan independence and the existence of modern Texas for his country of Mexico, and I hope you'll give him a very warm welcome.
I'd like to thank the organizers of this wonderful symposium for inviting me to be here with you today. I have to say that when James Crisp invited me to come to talk to you about this strange topic, I had to say the truth. I am not a specialist in the history of Texas. The farthest I got was to study U.S.-Mexican diplomatic relations as part of my minor of my PhD program. But since he had read my book on revolution and counter-revolution during the Mexican independence, he thought that I might have something to say on the Texas history and the Alamo and San Jacinto and all this interesting part of the history of Mexico and the United States. So I accepted, and I have to thank him for making me study the history of Texas. And in doing so, I had the help of Miguel Ángel González Quiroga, a former speaker in this symposium, another historian, Cesar Morado, one of my friends, and help, Rosario Sierra, and, well, you that have been wonderful to me. I'm not, therefore, an expert on the history of Texas, but I do have some experience on Texas. My parents married in Mercedes, Texas, in the cotton picking fields, and they lived in Weslaco, where they procreated their first 3 children. During the 30s, they had to go back to Mexico, and they came back during the 50s. All my brothers and sisters live in this country, except me, and we are 10. 3 of them live here in Houston, others in Corpus Christi. And I worked in Corpus Christi some time. I was a school teacher. And from Corpus Christi, I went to Sam Houston, knowing nobody, not knowing what to do, but to decide to study. And after some time doing different types of jobs, I finished a master's degree on education. I was hired to teach in Raymondville High School as a Spanish and history teacher. I was the first Mexican to have taught in that part of the Rio Grande Valley. And from then on, I went back to Mexico, came back to Texas to study my master's and my PhD. And from there, I went to Mexico City. But since I felt what discrimination was in Corpus Christi and Huntsville, I had a sense of the people, of some people of this state. And in spite of that, I had the privilege of meeting many generous Texans and many generous Americans. When I went back to Mexico, I worked in many posts, but mainly on the academic field in El Colegio de Mexico and the National University. And then I decided to move, after 2 or 3 books I have published, to move into public administration. And after that, I accepted to be counsel. Well, in the Congress, I founded the Commission for Border Matters, Foreign Affairs, which I was fortunate enough to be the chairman. And then I was somehow a factor for the integration of the Hispanic caucus of the Congress in the United States and the border caucus, which fortunately is doing something important about U.S.-Mexican relations in Texas. Then I was Consul General, as it was said here, and I had the opportunity of helping many Mexicans to solve some of the violation of the human rights, and also was the chairman of the Paisano program, whose principal duty is to defend the rights of the Mexicans that were violated here in this country. In any event, I don't know, I'm not an expert on the history of Texas, but I have enough experience on Texas to at least talk about that. Now, getting into the topic. I've called my presentation, Texas, the Laboratory of Imperialism. And I'm going to divide my talk in two great parts, though you have there 11 chapters. One of them is why we got, what was before the Texas and what was after the San Jacinto. Texas, of course, did not finish for us in 1836. It finished in 1848. So Texas, for us, has more presence than only the battle. And then the other will be just some considerations around that. Although it's commonly accepted that the United States began its imperial period in the war against Spain in 1898, we can trace its background to its expansionist policy and the acquisition of Louisiana. But in 1795, the Natchez district in Mississippi was a clear advance of these imperialistic intentions. In 1803, in New Orleans, and the Louisiana Purchase was another tip of this desire. In 1810, the West Florida Revolt at Baton Rouge, where the West Florida Republic was born, and although it lasted only 1 month, they flew the Lone Star flag. In 1813, Mobile Bay, sieged from Spain during the War of 1810 from Britain. In 1819, Florida was transferred to the U.S. by the Adam-Onis Treaty, as it has been said here, and after Jackson's incursions in 1815. And then Moses and Stephen Austin got their land for prospective settlements. But after that, you have defined or shaped your foreign policy expressed in the Monroe Doctrine and the interventionist policy in support of Texas independence, which was achieved in San Jacinto, and can also be traced to the annexation of Texas to the United States, which was ratified by the war against Mexico, and its incorporation of more than 2 million square kilometers to its territory, including California, Oregon, Arizona, New Mexico, and as well portions of Utah, Nevada. And it was very clear that it was defined that America was for the Americans. That is, all America, all the continent. Now, if we want really to understand, according to my presentation, what really happened, we, I think, have to move to understand the differences between the two countries. Here we have two countries with two different experiences. those who are not very passionate like to express that the expansion of the United States was rooted in two different conceptions that Americans and Mexicans have of the world and of life. We are countries of different religions, values, cultures, two nations with contrasting historical experiences. One, of course, within the framework of the Anglo-Saxon heritage, and the other with the Spanish legacy. So the United States enters into this world united. If you think that you got your independence in 1776, by 1830, you had already more than 40 years of political stability. And when you do have that, if you analyze what happened in Mexico, then you'll see the great advantage in which you are over Mexico. So, if you were already practicing democracy, but you already have you have consolidated your political system. You were the progressive, and you were Democrats. You are also expansionists, and you were able to negotiate your differences in compromises. You have a way of doing and acting in politics. You were tolerant with respect to religious beliefs, and avoided, if you could, political disputes. At times it was very, very fiercely fought. In any event, you had enough space and ambition to be satisfied both for the individuals and for the nation. And in case of Mexico, there was not the same situation. Mexico, we were still trying to define the republic. We were fighting, having a clash between reason and religion, between faith and reason, science and religion, the altar and the throne, democracy and monarchy, and the oppressed against the exploiters, in the words of Luis Gonzalez, one of the most distinguished historians in Mexico. In brief, it was a struggle against monarchical, absolutist, and centralist colonial institutions against those who believe in the principles of the Enlightenment, the French Revolution, and the American Revolutions. So we are two nations with different conceptions of honor and wealth. In Mexico, the land had a different value. That's why at times it seems strange that nobody wanted to sell the land. While to you it was easy because it was part, in fact, in this period, buying and selling, and of course, controlling the land. For the Spaniards, the way they inherited, it was an honor to have the land. The larger the land, the wealthiest, and the most respected in society. It may be here too, that way, but it was not expressed that way either. So, if we see it with this context, how come the United States expansion came about? Well, there are those who argue that the United States expansion and the loss of the Mexican territory, it's a chronicle citing Garcia Marquez of a deposition or a separation long foretold. It was also the awakening of the United States in this imperialistic attitude. It was the power of the supremacy of the political, the structure, leaders of Washington, the supposed racial superiority, this mystical idea of a divine calling or manifest destiny, the struggle for power and political differences between North and South, the confrontation between slave owners and abolitionists, the extension of its domain, and the greed for ambition to expand without scruples by appropriating, invading, negotiating, bribing, annexing, or buying territory. All these steps, as you can see, are small parts of this imperial experience. But on the part of Mexico, there was somehow the spoliation, plunder, and a loss of long foretold expoliation and plunder, the natural result of the administrative chaos in the Mexican government, the conduct of ungrateful newcomers, especially those who arrived after 1830, immoral, fortune hunters, selfish, traitors, who swept down from the north. It was also the result of the disorder and instability of Mexico's political system, the endless disputes between liberal and conservatives, reformers and defenders of colonial institutions, progressive-minded politicians, and the entrenched clergy, and the merciless struggle between federalists and centralists. So the chronicle idea of the process of the United States land began in 1786, when Thomas Jefferson declared that the United States should be the center upon which all of America, North and South, should be populated. But in 1804, Baron de Humboldt, Alexander von Humboldt, spurred the ambition of Jefferson, and countless land speculators by exaggerating Mexico's wealth and creating the myth of the cuerno de la abundancia, the horn of plenty. The plenty was at the top of the corn, of course. Those ambitions were also inadvertently awakened by the Mexican insurgents like Miguel Hidalgo and José María Morelos, when they sought recognition for the independence movement in the United States. But in doing so, they confirmed the weakness of Spain, or the incapability of Spain to maintain power on Mexico, and also the weakness of their own movement. Hidalgo was on the way out, felt he was going to be defeated. But it was the same year that others like José Manuel Herrera, Josefina Vázquez, and Lorenzo Meyer went to the point of saying that even Morelos, our most important hero of independence after Hidalgo, offered Texas in exchange for help to the United States government. Well, in that same year, negotiations began that will culminate in the Adams-Onis Treaty and the acquisition of Florida. But the intention of getting to the South and acquiring Texas was always present. Like I said, purchase by this treaty, any type of agreement, or conquest, bribery, I said, invasion, or pure armed intervention, among many other things that were tried by the United States diplomats and representatives of this government. In 1821, under very dramatic conditions, Mexico became independent. And Crisp was telling you that it was a big deception because the independence was achieved rather, by those who were not liberals, but not those who were not progressists or Democrats. It was the counter-revolutionaries that finished the independence, not those who began the independence. So, of course, this discouraged many, many people, especially those who were in favor of democracy. So, Mexico was born with great optimism in spite of that. Her territory was as large as the United States, or larger, but very soon it was enveloped by a syndrome that I associate with that novel of Hemingway, The Old Man and the Sea, in which, if you remember, an elderly man in an all ill-equipped boat caught a very large fish. Nevertheless, upon taking it to the coast, once he caught it, the great size of his prey, combined with the weak strength and the simple equipment he had, made it impossible to save it and keep it because it was gradually consumed by the sharks before reaching the shore. In those circumstances, the old fisherman only enjoyed his catch in the remembrance of he had accomplished a wonderful deed. During the brief empire of Iturbide, Mexico lost Central America. Spain threatened the independence by its control of the fortress of San Juan de Ulúa in Veracruz. Shortly, Spain invaded Mexico. France exacted more or less the same thing when tried to get recompense for the past war. England threatened invasion for the non-payment debts. Russia was trying to get possessions of parts of Mexico's northwest, and the United States revealed its very obvious manifest destiny that began to take shape in Texas and would continue to the Northwest Territories and to the Pacific. So Mexico disintegration began in Texas. And when Austin received his 1,400 concessions, land grants, it was not only Austin. Lorenzo de Zavala, Ramos Arizpe, Vicente Filisola also obtained grants. This concession by law should not be sold, but few really respected that. So they were selling them, exchanging them, except two, Austin and Green DeWitt, that decided to remain loyal to their commitment. But the others abused, and this abuse, including Lorenzo de Zavala, was for the Mexican government, began to fear of what might happen with the new colonizers. So the suspicions that the newcomers would rise in rebellion was present at that moment. And the fear was confirmed by Hayden Edwards when he, you remember, declared the Republic of Fredonia in 1826. But the growing anarchy, coupled with the abuses of the absence of Mexican authority, led to the approval or the passage of what we call the Ley de Colonización of 1830, and you call it the April 1830, which returned the control of the land to the central government and not to the states. So we decided to populate by ourselves the land and not accepting the northerners, which were at that time, of course, outlaws. Mieri Terán was a very famous general from northern Mexico. He knew very well what was happening in Texas, and witnessed the American expansionist designs, alerted the Mexican government to the growing danger of losing Texas due to the lack of the Mexican population, and he was so enthusiastic about it that he went to the point of creating towns called Tenochtitlan, Anahuac, just to confront them. And of course, many were convinced that the problem in Texas was the lack of Mexican population. In any event, Mieri Terán, who was a very prominent general, since he was not successful in his mission, he committed suicide in frustration. While this was happening, we had the visit of Joel Poinsett, who came to Mexico with the spirit of the conqueror. But nevertheless, he failed in his attempt to buy Texas for $1 million that was offered at the time. So he returned to the United States empty-handed, but he was capable enough to create an upheaval within the political system in Mexico. So he created the Yorquino Party within that is the Federalist Party within the Republic. But he was replaced by his countryman, Anthony Butler. These two men were from where Mr. Andrew Jackson was from. Was it South Carolina? South Carolina. So it kind of like friends from South Carolina were getting together to join this loyally. He was a land speculator, capricious, unscrupulous, with a background of a slaveholder. In contrast to Poinsett, nevertheless, he got the approval of the Treaty of Amity and Commerce, which ironically got the most favored nation and was ratified in 1836. During this decade, 1820-30, the population of the United States grew to 13 million, the double of that of Mexico. In 1820, the internal provinces, which included Chihuahua, Coahuila, Nuevo León, Tamaulipas, and Texas, had a population of about 150,000. There were only about 3,000 living in Texas. However, by 1836, Anglo-Americans to Texas had swelled the population to almost 40,000. So, the original Anglo colonists adapted easily to the laws of their adopted country. They committed themselves to work their lands without expressing ill feelings toward the Mexican government, though they were very well aware of the political instability. They were treated with respect, and some in Mexico were critical of them because of the extreme differences that they were receiving from the government. They came to live and they came to work under the rules of the new government that respected the terms of the land grants and stood by their commitments. The new colonies, nevertheless, were different or behaved in a very different manner. Most of them arrived after 1830 and had a different interest, different ideas, different objectives. They were somehow mirrored by the interest of the government in Washington and in its expansion, its policies. They sought first the separation of Texas from Coahuila, then Texas from Mexico, and later the annexation of Texas to the United States. And this was, of course, something that was not, it was seen by the Mexican government, but they couldn't do anything to prevent it. And when by 1835, the governor of Coahuila decided to live in Texas, in San Antonio, to change the capital from Saltillo to San Antonio, the population rebelled against the governor. So the change was not, it was not possible, but it was a very clear sign that the expansionist policy or desire was well on its way. Almost all these leaders, of these volunteers, in quotes, had arrived in Texas, like I said, after 1830. But these new arrivals were politicians, lawyers, slaveholders, mercenaries, and land speculators. They were, or soon become, friends of Sam Houston. A good number of them were from South Carolina, countrymen of Andrew Jackson, and still others from Tennessee and New Orleans, who used positions of leadership to prepare the blow against Mexico. They were a multitude of immigrants from the United States who, in the words of Jim Crisp, hurried to Texas at the first sign of a revolt against Mexico. Among them, Crockett, Bonham, Travis, Houston was the leader, and Bobby was already married to the daughter of the governor of Coahuila, so it was not foreign. But also the governor of Coahuila, Veramendi, was in it, and Navarro was in it, and Ruiz was in it, and Seguin was in it, and Lorenzo de Zavala. And of course, they were not interested in the population of Texas, but they somehow were responding to the interests of Andrew Jackson. The Alamo, I will not go into details. The numerical superiority of the Mexicans, of the Mexican army, determining the defeat of Texans. And after cannons became silent, in less than an hour, the Alamo fell. In that battle, the Mexican army lost 600 soldiers, which is not more than those that were defending the Alamo. Santana made the absurd decision to order the unnecessary execution of all the defenders. Not all lied, but most of them. And they lied like heroes. In an even greater example of cruelty, as you well know, Santana ordered the execution of 341 prisoners captured in Goliad. And this massacre was even worse than the Alamo. On March 2, 1836, Texas declared its independence from Mexico. 4 days before the massacre of Alamo, Burnett and Lorenza de Zavala elected president and vice president of the new republic. In spite of this, Santana continued his pursuit of Houston, who had sought a strategic refuge in the wooded region of northeast Texas. There he could better defend behind himself against the superior army of Santana. And Santana made the mistake of dividing his troops. The strategy of Houston worked. Houston got notice, intercepted a letter sent by Santana and his officers. So Houston learned of the movements of Santana. That facilitated his plan for a surprise attack on the Mexican camp, where Santana, as I read in some of good, serious books, was asleep in the company of a beautiful mulata, which was not unusual for Santana, by the way. Well, it was not. In fact, some say that thanks to that mulata, Santana did not react as fast as he should to direct the defense of his army. I don't know if that's true, but that should make her a heroine. Well, Houston was surprised Santana and defeated him. So it took 1 hour at the Alamo, in real terms, and 18 minutes in San Jacinto. They were enough to nullify all these 17 years of negotiations that began with the Onis and their desire to understand in between Mexico and Texas. Houston, as you know, maintained Santana as a hostage while negotiating 2 treaties that Santana accepted to sign, one as general and the other one as head of state. One was going to be public, and the other one was going to be private. As general, he accepted, like it was said here, the return of the troops to pay the damages of the landowners. And as a head of the state, of course, he was something else. He was going to recognize the independence of Texas and establish the Rio Grande as the frontier. Well, they say that he regretted very much to have signed that, but as expected, the Mexican government and the Congress rejected the treaties. I do want to say that the leaders of the Texas Revolution, these that arrived after 1830, were undocumented or they were illegal in Mexico or in the territory. But if they were illegal or undocumented, they were irregularly documented because they developed such a fervor of patriotism in 3 years that's very strange for anybody, unless Houston and the others were clearly responding to the designs of the President of the United States at the time, Andrew Jackson. And therefore, the legal status of migration was not really something that they cared too much about. Well, if we may have some doubts about Houston, we don't have doubts about David Crockett, who was not documented at all. In any event, Santana was displayed as a trophy in many parts, and until he went to see President Jackson, and he sought once again to purchase California. What were the consequences in Mexico of this? Well, it's not difficult to say that the independence or the Battle of San Jacinto and the independence of Texas reflected or provoked the vulnerability of the Mexican institutions, the political, economic, and military chaos of the Mexican government, the lack of a national plan, an economic crisis reflected in a fiscal system disarray, or the disorganization of the tax system, the continuing conflict between monarchical and republican institutions, the mistrust for foreigners, the strengthening of centralism, and the proliferation of separated movements. The growing realization of Mexico was not the convincing the Americans that Mexico was not a rival that would trouble Washington. The ascendancy of the militarism, the acquisition of arms to defend Mexico's northern border with greater effectiveness, the rejection of the liberal ideas, the influence of Texas in support of the separatist movements in Mexico, the prohibition in Mexico to sail territory. For Mexicans in Texas, racial and social differences became more acute and affected rural workers, peons, and even the higher classes, where here they were not considered trustworthy. The Texans organized commerce by operating the Rio Grande navigation and channeling merchandise from Chihuahua to New Mexico to international markets by the way of Matamoros, that by the time was an important town by more than 7,000 people. But contraband that was present in Mexico since the independence grew immensely. And it was not strange to find all merchandise from Europe being sold in the border. Of course, the products from northern United States had a way to go into Mexico. And the lack of economic development of Mexico allowed them to have a good market for their products. The Texas energized commerce by opening the Rio Grande to navigation and channeling merchandise from Chihuahua to New Mexico. And they also obtained the control of Santa Fe, Chihuahua trade. They made profits over $15 million at the time. So the relations between Texans and the Mexicans after San Jacinto became unstable, contradictory, and filled with mistrust. Through matrimony and compadrazgos, the Mexican landholding elite formed a union with the Anglo lawyers and merchants and occupied the highest level of society. Although some large owners were displaced, those who remained were integrated into Texas culture with their own, as you know, different or peculiar characteristics. Mexican inhabitants or settlers north of the Rio Nueces were victims of plunder and dispossessed of their land. Others were expelled, as in the cases of San Patricio, La Bahia, Victoria, and Refugio. Independent Mexican ranchers became poorer and rural workers were uprooted. Later, they became a class of low-paid rural workers. But the expansionists of the United States, ideas of the United States, did not cease. Quite the contrary. Texas will be present in the political adversity of Mexico in this next decade. Mexico experienced even greater instability after this incident in the form of mutinies, uprisings, military coups, rebellion, internal revolts. She also suffered constant mutations of her political system, from monarchy to republic, to federal republic, to centralist republic, to dictatorship, to republic again, to dictatorship. So this unfinished disease succession that seems really endless. And this is how, more or less, while you only had 2 presidents, we already had 19. So, between 1835, like I'm saying, to 1846, Santana was 7 times president of Mexico. And the cabinets of these governments lasted the most from 1 to 3 months. So we were not really having a government. And Texas was independent for 10 years, as we know. And they maintained the slaves, 125,000, I think, of them lived at the time, of which 27,000 were slaves. The United States maintained a watchful eye, ever alert to prevent any attempt by Mexico to reconquer the lost province. At the same time, successive governments considered the possibility of extending her territory by claiming New Mexico and California as part of the domain and part of her ambition to reach the Pacific Ocean. Concurrently, U.S. pressure on Mexico territory continued. Imperial expansionist fever had whirled out of control. The conquest of the West was a priority. After Texas, they might have thought, why not California and Oregon or even Canada? The U.S. government, reverting its accustomed aggressive style that had given her positive results, continued defying Mexico with blockades of ports, claims of protest, incursions, and defense of illegal squatters who practiced a well-worn routine of moving into an arena, just like on the expansion of the West, and once having problems, call for the help or calling the corporation to the United States. It was, ironically, that in this context, Spain finally recognized the independence of Mexico. France invaded Mexico in 1938, and Santana, for our misfortune, historically speaking, our hero of, how do you say, operatic history, operetta, hero, became a hero by chance, lost a leg, which was more dramatic. He buried his leg with all the pomp and circumstance. And when he was ousted, the leg was paraded by the cities of Mexico City like a trophy for the population. Well, this gentleman, with his seemingly fictional character, without a country, without principles or ideology, when he came back, Mexico could not expect but the worst. And thus it happened. The annexation of Texas and Oregon, as has been said here, was the principal campaign issue of the elections in 1844. It became a struggle between slaveholders and abolitionists also. And it also became a nightmare for the Mexican government, who, in spite of the weak position in which it stayed, considered the annexation of Texas as a casus belli, the cause of war. Well, this played into the hands of the government at Washington, which was searching for a pretext to invade Mexico. And so they find it. President Polk was eager and continued with special zeal the expansionist policies of Andrew Jackson. In his inaugural address, he made it clear that Texas annexation was an issue that could be settled by Texans and their government. During that time, popular opinion held that Mexico was not a serious rival, which they were right, and in no condition to defend her territory. Mexico was a bankrupt nation at the mercy of abusive moneylenders and dependent on the economic resources of the church. So, when President Polk assigned Zachary Taylor to invade this part that Dr. Howe was remembering as a provocative intent, Mexico knew, they knew the conditions of the army in Mexico. They were very well informed that the lack of provisions, uniforms, with troops, some of them had never fought or took or fired a weapon, and whose loyalty was to the local state governments as militia, members of the militia, and not regular army. He knew that Mexico had a meager force to defend the more than 3,000 kilometers of her northern border. He was aware of the obsolescence of the Mexican weapons and the superiority of artillery of the United States Army, which, owing to modern technology, was vastly superior in quantity and quality to that of the Mexicans. His soldiers were well trained and handled their weapons with skill and professionalism, and their bedoubts, the modern infantry and cavalry were superior and better equipped than those of Mexico. So, in 1846, I guess, the curtain of the theater was open. 7 soldiers were killed in this space. But it was not long for Taylor to confirm the inadequacy of the army. It was also became evident that the lack of weapons of mass destruction, as they say it now, or anything comparable to that, especially to face the flying artillery designed by Major Sam Ringgold, I think it's the name, the same artillery that had a longer range with greater mobility than that of the Mexicans, as Professor Howe has pointed out, would be utilized with great effectiveness at the beginning of the war. All that was missing. The only thing that happened was a pretext to validate the plans of provocation devised in Washington. Mexico, like I was saying, did not have an army to defend the so many kilometers, and we only expected what we know. So in May in 46, in Carricitos, 7 soldiers were killed. It was enough to say that the war of conquest of Mexico began, and it was the greatest rehearsal. Expansionists intensified the disputes between slaveholders and abolitionists, and it became a rehearsal that prepared the way for the Civil War. Then,
we're a little over time.
I finished.
I thought you had a film.
I do have a film. Are we really over time? I thought it was 1 hour. It's 4 minutes.
Yes, please, show.
Well, would you let me finish, and then if they are not tired, do you want me to 5 more minutes? No. Sorry. So the signature of the Guadalupe Hidalgo was already discussed here. I will not go into that. But it was very clear that, to me, this was the imperialist way of acting of the United States at that time. So the treaty concluded a long process of U.S. imperial expansion that began with Texas independence, grounded in the treaties of Velasco in 1836. In the process, in this big process, General Scott achieved the greatest U.S. military exploit of the 19th century, and James Polk obtained the greatest triumph in terms of territorial acquisition in the history of the United States. In our region, and I'm going to finish now so you will relax.
Totally relaxed.
In our region, the physical border was defined by the river. And along the sides, we developed military forts, were erected cities around them. And if you know that the border cities are friends and they help each other in many ways, so they know them very well. Since they are so far away from Washington or from Mexico City, they learn to live together. And they do it very, very well until the central governments go there and interfere with their things. But after the war, Monterrey became a very important city, and so Houston and San Antonio. So after 175 years, I think, since 175 years have passed since this war, some remember it with great honor or as a point of honor, and others with dishonor. But to me, both positions are extremely exaggerated. Historical events should be explained in relation to their circumstances, and to clarify them, we have to have a comprehensive or holistic approach. However serious or grave these events may have been, their example should serve to eliminate cliches or stereotypes that are associated with discriminations or xenophobia that I'm seeing growing again in this part of the country. That fence that you have built there, that fence of ignorance, is only an example of that. And that serves to impair our relationship, our friendship. But we know that in our time, the only constant is change. We cannot live in the past. I think that we are obligated to find common grounds and to plan for the shared future. After all, we share a common border that obligates us to eliminate artificial barriers, whatever established or that were established without regard to history. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lunch awaits us in the Shamrock Room. We'll reconvene here at 1:30. Thank you.